Hello and welcome to Real Hi-Fi Help. This is a video of how to make bad gear sound good. So we all get in this situation where we start in hi-fi or in some part of the journey that we're on, come across some gear that we're kind of stuck with. We can't really go on to the next level and get some much better gear. So this is a way of you kind of dealing with that gear so that you basically create a smart compensating sound, making the gear seem a lot better than it really is. So yeah, easy. Sophisticated compensation, and you just don't confront the problem directly full on. You kind of put a curve on the sound, and this is how you do that. So this is a really good speaker to use as an example. This could be DTQWT, it could be Van der Steen 1CI, 2CE. This is just an example from me. So this is a speaker that costs about $2,000 to $3,000 to build, and it's a fantastic do-it-yourself build. And yeah, it has usually one or two firing bass units at the back, pretty deep. I think it's about 1/2 meter deep. And we've got this like horn, treble and function inside, and a pretty big middle tone unit. So yeah, all of this stuff, all of this surface area, and using this whole speaker as a horn and being 95 dB, that makes it a very forgiving, pleasing, organic type of sound. But I would still only call it at about 15 out of 100 on a scale of really good sound. Forget ultra detailed, micro detail layering and perfect balance and hearing everything in the recordings. There is some holes in the sound, but even though it has all of that, this is a speaker that you can really work a lot with. So that's what's really good about it, compared to like many of the newer modern designs with slimmer cabinets, smaller speaker units, and just costing a lot more than this usually. So could we make it go from a 15 to a 35? I believe we can, and this is because I've actually heard this before. So spoiler alert. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to take something like this, for example, a normal cheap NAD CD player. They usually cost about 50 or $100 used. And we're going to combine it with that. And I would rate it only to be about 5 out of 100. Some people probably think that that's being a bit harsh, because it gives you a lot of value for the money. Yeah, it does. But it gives you a lot of value for the money because you're talking a very certain type of safe language with the other gear, meaning that we will combine it with this and combine it with this, creating the illusion of having gear that's probably 30 out of 100, which is a huge step. So Torhauge, they make some really warm, nice, forgiving, basic type of tube sound. It's like almost the most basic tube sound that you can get. But that's not saying that it's a really bad brand. Not at all, not at all. A lot of tube gear at the bottom end is pretty basic. But what's special about Torhauge is just how incredibly warm it is. And because of that, we can take something that is a bit unsophisticated and harsh, and a speaker like this, and put it all together, combine it, and we can actually make it better than a normal system that a normal person has set up in a normal room. And that could be a system that's Aquaphase, Macintosh, Passlabs, Ear, whatever. So we just make sure that we use a bit of these tricks on simply doing that. So like I said before, the attack plan for doing this is stay within the safe zone and don't use revealing cables that challenge the sound. Don't use revealing plugs, power boxes, so on. Just want to hit the same type of religion and make it kind of curve from one unit to the other, so we're not seeing too much of the bad stuff. So yeah, can it beat? Let's take a specific example. Can it beat a $60,000 Macintosh system? I believe that it can. So and we're talking about a normal Macintosh system under normal conditions. I've heard this several times. That's why I'm doing this video. I've heard this several times at several places. So just know that this isn't just me speculating. I have a friend that has done this, and I know from some other people, and I know from the previous systems that this guy has also had. This is something that I've heard several times. So we're comparing it now to a system that is Macintosh monoblocks, probably around 40K for these new, and probably about 20K for this preamp, and about 2K for this speaker used. That's my guess. And then of course we need a source. Source would then be basic Macintosh CD player. I think it's from around 2005. So all in all, $64,000 US dollars, and we're gonna beat it with a system that's only gonna cost about 8,000 US dollars. So this is how I would do it. I would make sure that the DTQWT speakers are about 100 centimeters from the front wall where the music is, and about 50 centimeters from the side walls. That would help boost the sound and make it more natural. So around that area. And then we'll make sure that there's a carpet in the room, so we don't get any unwanted reflections. And then there's only about 6 meters from the front to the back wall. So that means that the speaker is about 5 meters from your sitting position. So just connect everything and then try and use some VBOR 1501 power cables that come with the VBOR power plugs. These are really good at compensating, especially when you're going for these lower class types of gear. This is just one example. This could easily have been like a retro Accuphase Past Labs Macintosh system. You could also do it with that, or many other gear. When you have such a low class system, you want low class but still reasonably good compensational power cables, and that's a really, really good compensational power cables. Now I've tried putting VDH cables on instead, Vandenhoek cables, and it also sounds, in a way good, but I find it to be a bit too low class warm, a bit too suppressive, and not releasing the sound quite as much. So I did that. It did not work out very well. I did that also at several friends' places that had these DTQWT speakers, and it just never really sounded optimal. But you could somehow make that work. But I would still recommend VBOR power cables. It's a lot cheaper. And yeah, I also tried QED silver cables, silver standard cables, and again, too harsh, too grainy, too confrontational. You see through the makeup when you start using cables like that. So yeah, don't recommend that. So yeah, that's basically it. That is how an 8K system beats a 64K system, especially if it's in a larger room with a 64K system. So what if we turn that around? How do we then make a 64K system, this particular Macintosh system, like you saw here with this CD player, preamp and monoblocks. How do we then turn that around to beat this stuff at the top? You know, the Nate, DTQWT, and the Torhauge. How do we do that? Well, I've heard that. I've actually heard that. And the way that the guy did that was very, very easy. He just changed the B&W speaker, this particular model here. He just changed that. He tried a lot of other B&W speakers, and you know, they all were kind of, you know, good in their own way, and they did get a lot better once he moved up in models. But just DTQWT, it just made his sound so much more natural, forgiving, and musical, and that was what his Macintosh really was lacking, because it was just almost too good to be true, you know. It just lacked believability. So this is kind of just telling you guys that this is a trick that you can do on a lot of gear, and sometimes when you're dealing with equipment that is so bad, you actually have to consider using, you know, really bad cables, not going into stores and buying these fancy cables, but just using some basic eBay cables, some basic stuff that you make yourself. Have some really thick wires to boost the sound and stuff like that. That's what you kind of want to do in this class. So yeah, you can do it with a lot of gear that's probably 20 to 60 years old and is very noisy. And it keeps the sound safe, it keeps it musical, it keeps it comfortable, it kind of spices it up, but in a way where everything is kind of accessible and not going into this like higher class confrontational sound where it will fall apart if you do that. You'll start to hear, if you put this speaker here, if you put this pretty good compensational speaker, if you put that on, let's say, a Class A piece of equipment, or Plinius, or Lyngdorf, or something like that, you will hear how many holes there is in the tuning of the speaker. You will hear the mechanical noise that gets out from this cabinet, you know. There's a unit here, and then about two at the back, I think like this. You can hear that noise coming through here, and you can feel it all falling apart, and that whole illusion of it making the music like forgiving in a good way, it just falls apart because you're like heading into the detail direct on, you know, confronting it, and you don't want to do that. Because when we're dealing with stuff like Plinius, Class A, Exposure, Primar, that's higher class stuff than Torhauge. But even though it's higher class stuff, you need a higher class speaker in order for that to sound better. So if you're putting higher class stuff with a lower class speaker, it's gonna fall apart. And you might blame the speaker and think that, oh, it's just a bad speaker, it can't sound good with anything. No, you can make this on worse equipment, like I just shown you, sound better than gear like Class A, Plinius. I mean, a lot of higher class brands like that than Torhauge. So there is a way of making bad stuff sound good. And that is why a lot of people keep a lot of bad gear, a lot of basic tube gear, because a lot of it creates so much noise and is built in such a bad way that when you have so much noise in the system, it kind of, in a way, spices up the sound. So if you find like a truly bad partner that goes with it, you can make those two things come together and actually beat, you know, higher class gear like we saw with Macintosh. You know, it can be done. But again, you know, knowing that Macintosh is a lot better, I could also create a whole new Macintosh system that is a lot cheaper than this. If I took like instead of using the monoblocks here with the preamp, I could just go for like an MA 8000 amp, integrated amp, that would cost me like, I don't know, a third of the price, I'm guessing, a third of the price used. And why not? Probably like a fifth of the price used. Yeah, I think like a fifth of the price used. Why not do that instead, you know? Because you're getting a more integrated sound. You won't be hearing the extra cables that are on the chain. I don't know how many watts it has, like 250 watts or something like that, the MA 8000. That's more than enough for most rooms that are 20, 30, 40, 50 square meters. You don't really need more than 250 watts in the Class AB world. You don't really need that. I mean, it's nice to have, but you don't really need it. You just need to, you know, support that bass with good power conditioner, good cables, stuff like that. Have a front and a back wall that's relatively close, and then that will in itself not make you lose the watts in an artificial way. So you have to have like 500,000, 2,000 watt amplifiers. You know, it's not necessary. When you're doing that in a room that's 7 to 10 to 12 meters, it's just compensating. You know, it's just, you're just pumping sound out in the room, and it's just very inefficient. So that's how I would do it. I could create a Macintosh system that's a lot better than this Macintosh system. I can take an MA 8000 integrated amp, that could be like 10,000, 10K for that. MA 800 integrated, and then I can take it with directly, just bypassing the preamp. Don't need that. It's integrated in the MA 8000, and just take a used 201 CD player. If you're lucky, you can get that for like 1,000, but I think that people are still charging about 2,000 for those. I mean, then you have $12,000 Macintosh system beating a $64,000 Macintosh system easily, you know. And yeah, you might have to use it in a room that's not quite as big, because that big room just sucks a lot of that power away, the power delivery away. But you could do that. And you can even beat that system with like this speaker here, you know, instead of the DTQ-WT. Just find an appropriately small room that's probably only like 4 or 5 meters from the front wall to the back wall where you're sitting. And then that could actually beat the system, the Macintosh system I showed you before that had the DTQ-WT, you know. So everything's relative, you know. I always say this is good, this is better than that, and all that. But you guys have to realize that we're all right, because truth is relative to who you are, in what conditions, and what match you do with the gear. So you could have some really bad gear and you can still make it sound good. So we don't have to lose hope. We don't have to use all of our money on expensive hi-fi gear. We don't all have to go for the exclusive brands that are potentially a hell of a lot better. Because if we can just get our crappy brands to produce a very high potential of sound, not playing at the usual 20% potential, but playing perhaps 60, 70, 80%, then most people will be happy with their normal gear. So, but yeah, it still takes some decent gear, you know. Not just any bad gear will do the job, and we all kind of know that. So these are just like good examples of bad gear that can actually sound a hell of a lot better than it really is. These are good examples. These are like best of budget bad gear that can sound good. Ned makes some really popular CD players. They do a good job at producing CD players that are very cheap. A lot of people use them. A lot of people think that they're really good, that have a tiny bit of warmness. Yeah, they do. I mean, compared to that normal class that they're in, they do have a bit of organic warmness and naturalness and stuff like that. And they are flawed to a degree where it actually sounds good. It's true. You just have to find those magical ways of combining gear, making stuff sound awesome, just making stuff sounding awesome. And when we look at all of these speakers that people are so crazy about, you know, ATC speakers, Tannoy speakers, JBL speakers, Clip speakers, what do they all have in common? They all have big cabinets, they all have big units. And because you have big cabinets and big units, it's a way of sort of compensating, which can be either good or bad, depending on how much you challenge the sound. So everything's relative. So yeah, I hope that kind of puts everything in perspective, because I think a lot of people will kind of realize that we don't all have to get like expensive audio note speakers in order to get, you know, a taste of that really good sound. It doesn't have to be expensive Verity or Martin Design or Karma speakers or Peak Console speakers. Those are basically the best speakers in the world, but we could still get close to that and get a taste of that by buying stuff that's 1/10, 1/20th of the price. And yeah, that's me showing you how it's done. And like and subscribe if you can. It's been a very interesting video. Have a nice day. Bye.